Okay, I think we're going to start 5 minutes early. So I've been asked to talk to you a little bit about Agile lessons learned. These are lessons I've learned in running some Agile projects. We've also got some other experts in the room which I'll defer to. Perhaps they can give you their opinion. But it's also around some of the lessons that we've learned as Mendix running Agile projects with the Mendix platform, which is subtly different to perhaps some of the ways in which you guys and girls might be running Agile projects within your own organization. Before I start, just a quick straw poll of the room in terms of how many of you are actively involved in running Agile projects right now in the room? Pretty much everybody, right? How many of you are Scrum masters? In proportion? How many are product owners? Okay, product owners. And how many of you are business engineers or development guys? At the front. Okay, so we've got a broad mix. So how many of you is Agile completely new? Never run an Agile project before or been involved? Okay, so I'm talking to the experts really. So let's hope what I say makes some sense. So what I wanted to do is to start by just reminding ourselves what Agile is all about and what we're trying to solve by running Agile projects. I really like this. Everybody's probably seen it before, but I love it. I think it sums up Agile really well. You know, walking on water and writing software from a specification as simple as long as they're both frozen. And I've been involved in IT for a long time now. I've been involved in running projects both in a waterfall method and in an Agile method, and I think that's a very true statement that locking down software requirements, writing a specification and working to a specification makes life very difficult in terms of managing change, delivering applications on time and budget, and actually solutions that meet end user needs. I think we tend to lose focus of the fact that actually what we need to do is to satisfy the needs of our business users, our consumers, the people that are using the software. And traditionally what happens with a specification is it's just a mechanism to beat somebody around the head with, right? It wasn't in the specs, so you didn't get it. It wasn't in the spec, so you don't have to pay for it, or you have to pay more for it. And it becomes a document that we tend to spend more time arguing about because we've been unable to deliver what we actually set out to do, which is write some software that people want to use. And we can overcomplicate things. So I just wanted to remind us of what it means to be Agile and why we need to be Agile. There is an Agile Manifesto. Does anybody know it? Can you recite the Agile Manifesto off the top of your head? There is one. I can't. I have to remind myself. But I think there's some really important things that Agile addresses, and I think these things are very well aligned with Mendix, right? We're trying to foster a collaborative environment where business users are no longer just customers that we see at the end of the process, the people that are actively involved, working with us on a daily basis to forge something out of nothing. One of the things I really love about Agile projects is that they're a really, really exciting place to be. Anybody who's been involved in one, and well, anybody who's come from a traditional software development background, I started off my life developing COBOL in 1985, so it's a long time ago. I was involved in building those monolithic systems that took forever. It was a manufacturing system. There was nothing exciting about it at all. I turned up every day, wrote some COBOL, went home. People told me it wasn't very good. That's why I stopped writing software. And I never saw a customer. I never got to see what the end user did with the software. I sat in a room, and it wasn't exciting. One of the things I think about Agile, in my experience, and I'll give a quick straw poll later, the Agile projects are really, really exciting places to be. Both for an end user and both for a developer. It's a way in which you can stand up in front of your peers and be recognized for doing something that's often not synonymous with software development. Most software projects historically go wrong. They don't deliver on time. They don't deliver on budget. They're difficult. They're hard places to be. So I think the Agile Manifesto looks at solving a number of problems. Individuals' interaction over process and tools. Working software over comprehensive documentation, although some people take that to the extent, and we have lots of software and absolutely no documentation. I think you need to balance that. Customer collaboration. If I was to pick anything out of the Agile Manifesto, that for me would be the most important. And responding to change over following a plan. So Agile is designed to keep change out of the process for the shortest period of time. So that's why we work in sprints. Yeah? You want to lock things down so that during that process you're not going to change things. But then outside of that process, things can change. But I've seen a lot of customers that actually just think that Agile means change. And that just means we can change our mind overnight. So we need to have a look at that as well. This is all familiar to you guys, I'm guessing, right? The Agile Manifesto. But I just wanted to remind ourselves of that. And then finally, just to look at I've just picked out some of the, some red highlights here from the principles behind the Agile Manifesto. Well, I have on my screen, but they're not on here, they're in blue. And I focus really on continuous, simplicity. I'm going to come back to self-organizing teams, face-to-face conversations. If I look at Mendix, look at the reason that the founders created the Mendix platform, it was about that. It was about how can we facilitate that close collaboration and make software development simple, fun, and exciting. And then, I don't know how many sat in the keynote, but you can see that we're doing some really exciting things with the software. We're going to make that available to people that traditionally, they wouldn't have access to that kind of software. They'd be low down in developing REST services, connecting to endpoints, and we're abstracting you away from that to focus on the real value, which is building and deploying applications. So, this guy's pretty quick, I'm running. So some questions. If you want to innovate at speed, how long should the sprints be? Any ideas? How many people think a sprint should be 4 weeks? 2 weeks? Any less than 2 weeks? Yeah? 1 week? I agree. Particularly in Mendix projects, I think what we found, our experience tells us that in the early stages of a Mendix product, because we run so quickly, much more quickly than traditional software development runs, we can achieve some incredible things. And so the pace of change is just too, we can't keep changing the process for long enough. So we're doing things really rapidly. So we would advocate in the early part of your Agile adoption of Mendix to work in 1 week sprints. Yeah, so cut it down to a week. Make sure that with those projects and those teams, you can get some understanding of cadence, that you can deliver something really, really rapidly to the business. You can learn from that. I mean, 2 week sprints ultimately is what we tend to run at, but most projects now, Peter and the guys will probably tell you if you speak to them afterwards, that we really bring it down to the 1 week's minimum viable product, get something out really quickly, celebrate early, and make sure that you get some real value in the early stages of the project that you can talk about, you can celebrate and have some success with. So, 1 week sprints, short cycles, it's more dynamic. Test the definition of done. I don't know how many people have been involved in Agile projects where the definition of done is a little bit vague. Nobody really knows. Well, I think it's done, but I'm not sure now who sets it to done. Is it the product owner who sets it to done, or who sets the actual story to done? Who actually goes and checks what the definition of done is, physically goes through that and says, right, this story's completed. We're going to move on to the next. So I think that's certainly an area that I feel is loosely defined in most Agile projects and tends to get overlooked. And I think when I look at Agile, there's a sort of latest responsible moment of change. And I think early stages of the projects, we want to try and make change and embrace change and then sort of iron it out. I also think that if 1 week sprints works for you, then stick with it. I mean, how many people actually run 1 week sprints, 5-day sprints? Anybody? You guys? Yeah, and if it works, then go with it. There's no reason to move to a 2 week sprint unless you feel that the business is ready for that and it needs it. Some organizations and some products require a much shorter development life cycle and much shorter iteration and much more frequent change. So 1 week sprints in the early stage and then traditionally move to 2 weeks, never longer than 2 week sprints in a Mendix project. That's typically where we draw the line. I'm going to ask for questions as we go. Any questions on that? No? Makes sense? Good.
You mentioned earlier on, that who says it's done, but we're trying to use Sprint for it.
Yeah.
It doesn't facilitate us in the way we want to work Scrum-wise.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting, it's an interesting comment. So I think when you look at Sprint is a lightweight tool. It gives you a quick and easy way of getting into managing Agile projects, but to a certain extent, you need to put processes around that. The technology will allow you to, running, to do, and done. Right? So you've got 3 stages. There's a lot of things that happen in between those, And I think, I guess you're alluding to that. So yeah, you need to put processes around how you get to that status of done. It certainly is an area as an organisation that we will look to focus on. But just to be digressing slightly, but I think what we've got to understand with Mendix is that there are great products out there that focus on that alone and are so feature-rich that we need to make sure that we keep abreast of what our core functionality is, which is delivering software quickly. So we'll improve the APIs, we'll probably improve some of the capability around there, but right now I'm not aware of any. So you really need to make sure that you define what done is from a process perspective, and you make sure you stick to that, and then just use the technology to set the story. Okay. For innovation projects, do we want larger or smaller teams that are fully self-sufficient? So larger teams, smaller teams, is a strange question, but it's interesting the answers that I got when I asked this last time. What sort of size of team? 4 people? Yeah? 6? Anybody? 6, 8, any? No, so typically around 4 to 6 people. I'd agree with that. Fully self-sufficient, we'll come back to. Anybody know the reason I chose American football for this? No? I chose American football because it's probably one of the very few sports where you bring an entirely different team on just to kick the ball. Yeah? You have a team that plays the game, and then you come and kick the ball, and a new team comes on, guy kicks the ball, and they go off. So what I'm trying to suggest by this is that what we look to do, most agile projects tend to try and include in the project, in the team, everybody that's needed to run that project. So you've got a UX guy, a product owner, a Scrum master, business engineers, maybe somebody to do some of the testing and so on. But what we're advocating, sorry, I wasn't sure whether I was going to go through detail of that, but what we're advocating is that that's not the way to run an agile project. So in terms of team structure, what we look to have is just the core people, which are business engineers, typically 2, a Scrum master, and a product owner. Yeah, if you need more business engineers, then that's great, but keep it to those core functional roles. If you need additional resource in the form of UX, integration, then you bring them in as and when you need them. Most people make the mistake of just trying to create everything they need in a single team, make them completely autonomous, which means they're cross-functional, they can get on with everything that they need. Our experience tells us, and I'm sure if you speak to Peter, the 2 Peters here, they'll tell you that our core teams work best if they have what they need at hand. Mendix, the modeling environment, gives you pretty much all the tools that you need to get on and start building software. And then you need to be mindful of when you bring in and fly in those experts to fulfill the role of integration or UX and UI, which goes a little bit against the grain in terms of Agile. But we find that certainly works best, and our most successful projects do that. I think what's important to mention there is that the ownership in terms of the Scrum Master and the product owner, particularly the Scrum Master, is all about managing dependencies. So if you are going to make those people a dependency and not have them as part of the team, you better make sure as a Scrum Master you're on the ball. Yeah, you know exactly what you need, and a product owner that you're on the ball, so that you can bring in those people at the right point to be effective. Worst case scenario is you leave it too late, plowing on with your development, you need an integration person, lady or gentleman, to come along, and they're not available. And then 6 months later, you're still waiting for the same people to come and help you out. So it's really important that the Scrum Master, the product owner, own the responsibility for managing those dependencies and bring them in as and when they're needed. You don't end up with bloat, so you don't end up with a project that contains people that a lot of the time in Mendix are actually sitting around not doing a great deal, waiting for their great moment to be involved in the project. Yeah, so I mean, this is a statement that I think we actually saw it on one of the slides, Derek's keynotes. So driving digital transformation is better when we bring somebody with a bright idea together with somebody with technology. And with Mendix, the technology is designed to facilitate the way in which we share the responsibility of delivering software. I mean, how many people in the room allow their development team to go out into the business and spend time sitting with business users, chatting and talking about software? Just a quick show of hands. Okay. How many people keep their business engineers or developers away from the business and use the product owner to go and find out what's going on? There's a sort of half a hand, yeah, two half hands, which I think is interesting. I'll come on to that in a second. I just wanted to do a quick straw poll. So this is what we think an optimum Mendix Agile team looks like. Product owner, fully empowered, knows the business, is probably from the business. A Scrum Master, typically trained Scrum Master, don't have to be. We often see a shared role between business engineer and Scrum Master. I don't particularly believe that works well. I think you need to separate those. It's a full-time job being a Scrum Master. Yeah? If you're doing it properly, it's a full-time job. You can't be a contributor in terms of developing software and managing a project. That's my experience, and some of you may well feel differently, but you would be rushed off your feet with a small team, of 4 people. So Scrum Master, 2 business engineers. How many people embed a tester in their Agile teams? A full-time tester, all the time. So that's only a small proportion of the people that put their hands up earlier. Yeah? It's a must. It's absolutely mandatory, in my opinion. If you're going to run Agile effectively, at speed, you have to test in the sprints. You have to do the testing while you're going. Because at the end of the sprint, you need something that works. If you get to the end of the sprint and it doesn't work, then you've wasted your time. So leaving testing till the end of the sprints, or some people actually leave it to the end of several sprints and do mass UAT testing and so on, isn't going to work. In my experience, I mean, people may well feel differently, and I'll ask Peter Stolp and the guys maybe to comment a little bit later. Peter, I'm sure you have a comment on that. So absolutely mandatory. If I could say one thing about your team right now, if you don't have an embedded tester, get one. Put them in there, make sure that they have plenty of things to do. It also means that the tester can be involved in building the test cases. So they're not just involved in testing the software as it comes out of the cycle. They're involved in actually constructing the user stories, which should contain test cases, managing those test cases, making sure that they test against the cases, and coming back to the question about when is done, part of that process is testing. So how can you set a story to done when you're only going to test at the end of the sprint? It doesn't make sense, because it's not done until you've gone through all that process. So one lesson learned from us is that absolutely now embedding testing. If I spend a lot of time with Mendix R&D, 13 teams managed by 2 guys, and every team has full-time test body, if not 2 in some teams, working within that core development area. I can't hear you, sorry. Across the rest of the team? Yeah. I mean, typically Agile teams are self-organizing. So there's no real hierarchy in an Agile team other than a product owner who basically owns the responsibility. So business engineers utilize the ceremonies to be able to organize themselves. And they do that in a way that means that they can be cross-functional to a certain extent, but also that they can share experiences with their own users. So nobody's really telling anybody what to do, other than a product owner who's dictating what it is we're building and why we're building it, is my experience. Okay. Overprotective product owner. Do we want to, we talked a little bit about this earlier, and the straw poll was a bit ahead of myself, to be honest. So getting the business engineers talking to the business, in our opinion, is an absolute must. We advocate that business engineers should spend a considerable amount of time customer-facing, demonstrating what they're doing, getting real feedback from the users, and utilizing that to effectively develop software. How many product owners again? How many people are product owners in the room? Yeah. Do you spend a lot of time facilitating the development teams in the business? Yeah? Supporting that? Yeah. I come across a lot of sort of overzealous product owners who, it's my baby, I'm going to decide what we do and when we do it. You're going to do what I tell you to do. I'm going to interface with the business and tell you what the business needs. Which is great, and they will ultimately own and be responsible for whatever software gets created at the end of the day. And to a certain extent, it's a balancing act between giving those individuals the power to make the decisions, and also making sure that they are responsible, so they feel a level of control. If they don't control people, then how can they be responsible? Letting people go out to the business and just talk to people and develop software means I've lost control. And I think a well-matured, well-rounded product owner understands that that's an absolute necessity. So when we look to train product owners, one of the things that we try and do is to make sure that they really get the concept that they're there to be responsible and need to be in control of these kinds of things and provide direction, but they're not there to be the shield between the development team and the business. They're there to facilitate that process. And that's why being a product owner is probably one of the hardest jobs in the world for the product owners in the room. There's such a huge amount of responsibility over what gets built, huge amount of responsibility from your peers, and a huge amount of responsibility to the teams that you manage and work with to ensure that they're getting what they need to be successful in their roles. Okay, so business engineers, they talk regularly to the business, encourage close daily collaboration. There are plenty of ceremonies in Scrum. I'm not going to go through them, but we all know them, which are useful for collaboration with the business. Cross-functional teams, and all too often we find overzealous product owners. And actually, some level of competition between these two roles, Scrum Master and Product Owner. They really are very different roles, but I often find that we get some competition between a Scrum Master sort of crossing over into product direction and making decisions on what goes into a product backlog and what doesn't, rather than focusing on facilitating the speed at which people are developing, getting rid of blockages and so on. Okay, I did have another title at the top of this, and it said, be careful, good Agile can make you fat. But the US guys wouldn't let me put it up. I thought it was quite funny, but they wouldn't have it, so I thought it might upset anybody, so apologies if I upset anybody. But again, we do this really well, and actually, Peter at the front of the room, I don't know how many cakes your wife has baked in the last 12 months? 6 this year. Last year? So we're considering employing Peter's wife as a full-time employee, just baking cakes, right? That's what she's going to do for us from now on, and she's baked some incredible cakes, right? So, it's easy to forget this kind of thing, but celebrating success, because there is an awful lot of success in Agile projects, is fundamental. But don't just leave success. Go back. That slide's out of order, so just bear with me a second. Don't just leave celebrating success until the retrospective. How many people do this, but do it at the retrospective stage, i.e., get people into a room, set up a projector like this, and demo software? Hands up, who does that retrospective now? Yeah, a small number of people, actually. We'd advocate doing this almost daily, particularly in Mendix projects, because there's something to show every day. Actually, there's something to show often every hour. By the time you've sat down with a user and you've taken their requirements and built something, you could have a mini celebration every hour if you really wanted to. And that's why it's going to make you fat. You don't want to have a cake every time you celebrate, right? Otherwise, you're going to end up overweight and unhealthy. But we'd advocate celebrating all the time. Make Agile fun, celebrate successes as and when, but not just wait for the retrospective. And actually, a lot of people don't run retrospectives. I'm amazed how many people do not take retrospectives seriously in the Agile process. How many people in the room invite the CEO to a retrospective? I think it depends on your size of your organization. 1, 2, 3. So there's a few. I mean, you should be as higher up the hierarchy in terms of roles as you possibly can, because what you want to do is you want to make sure that those guys are sharing in the success, and those guys are excited by it, or girls, pardon me, are excited by the fact that you're doing something really special. It doesn't happen very often. I remember, I shan't say which organization it is, I remember running an Agile project for quite a large organization, and we sort of parachuted into the middle of the business. These 4 guys who turned up with some software, and everybody looked at us and what are they doing? All seems a bit strange. And then it went round that we're developing some software, some new software. And it was like rats leaving a sinking ship. Everybody was leaving this project because software projects don't go well, right? They're often unsuccessful, traditionally. And so nobody wanted to be part of it. So we were sort of sat in this room, feeling a little bit isolated, and what are we going to do? And it's only when we started showing what we'd done on a daily basis and inviting people. They had an intranet. I sent an invite to everybody, come and see what great stuff we've done. We got a couple of people the first day, and well, that was nice. And then the next day we got a few more people, and then the next day a few more. Until the end of the project, we were filling a room full of 100 people. These people wanted to come and see what we were doing. They were excited by it. Things were changing more dynamically than they'd ever seen before. And it was an exciting place to be. And once you start to create that buzz and people celebrating, then this is a self-fulfilling prophecy. You can start to have these agile teams running all over your business, being successful, celebrating what they do. So it will make you fat, though, because you'll eat too many cakes. So retrospectives are mandatory. Key responsibilities has to be key sponsor. Invite the world. Make a big song and dance about it, about sharing ideas. Get the feedback from people. Do it as regularly as you possibly can. Capture the feedback from that to make sure that you take in the feedback and work with it. But show real business value. I think at a retrospective, it's always important to make sure that you deliver something of tangible value. Otherwise, people will stop coming. If it's just a bit of wireframe and no substance, they'll stop coming. Yeah, it's been. Yeah, I'd probably combine them into one. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah, apart from the last one, capture list. Yeah, good point. Final thing, feedback. I often find feedback is just ignored or forgotten about and not taken seriously. And particularly if you're running testing at the end of a sprint, because that's when your feedback comes in. So you're getting the feedback from stuff that you've developed in between this sprint and the next sprint. How are you going to do anything sensible with it? It's probably just going to get dumped into the feedback loop, stay there, and nothing happens to it. So, I mean, how many people process feedback throughout the sprint? 1, 2, yeah, small number. Some sort of maybe, maybe not. That's probably because you do testing at the end of the sprint. Is that? Yeah. So feedback's really important. In my experience, it's the lifeblood of your agile process. It's a constant feed on how happy or unhappy your clients are, your end users. If it's full of bugs and things aren't working properly and they're unhappy, they're going to tell you through feedback. Probably not to your face, but they're certainly going to post something in the feedback and say, another bug, this is not working, so on. So picking up the feedback early, processing it throughout the project, making sure that you pay attention to feedback, again, is critically important to being successful. And it means you're doing the right things. It means that you're testing while you go. Leaving it till the end of the project and just seeing it as a sort of side effect of testing, stuff that we'll get back and we'll throw into the backlog, and eventually it might bubble its way to the surface. If it's bugs, it probably will do relatively quickly. But if it's new feature enhancements, they'll probably just get lost in the backlog and never make it to the surface and never get processed. And then your customers will be unhappy, and it'll be a cycle of dismay by the people that are using it. Then you'll stop getting feedback. People won't bother. Well, I gave you feedback last time. You did nothing with it. I'm not going to give you feedback. In fact, I'm not going to test it. So I think I'm probably being over-dramatic, right, with that. But it happens, and I've seen that happen. I've seen it where end users disengage from the process because you're not taking them seriously, you're not taking their feedback seriously, and then you're not moving forward. So it's challenging what you do, it's challenging the whole ethos of Agile, and it's stopping you being effective. So let's not just pay lip service to it, embed it into your processes, make it part of what you do on a daily basis as part of your test cycles and as part of your sort of daily routines. It mounts up quickly. There's an awful lot of feedback. In fact, it's one of these kind of things that all of a sudden, 2 days later, you can find that you've got 50 items in the feedback loop, and what am I going to do with that? It requires continuous assessment and filtering and pruning. It could be an almost full-time job, depending on the size of the project that you're running, at least a couple of days worth of work to get through that. Drives user stories, and if not properly managed, then it doesn't set the foundation for collaboration and success. And that's my experience. I run several Agile projects. I'm sure you guys have got other learnings that you've picked up along the way. Hopefully there's been some useful things in there about what we've learned and how Mendix projects have gone. I was told to keep it to 30 minutes to leave 15 minutes for questions. We're taking some as we go. I've got a microphone here if anybody wants to ask any more questions, or if, I don't know, some of our guys want to contribute, feel free. Any questions? Could I just, yeah, could you?
Well, every day on 9 o'clock the teams comes together and have a stand-up. And they tell what they are busy in,
Yeah.
what difficulties they have, and what they are continuing to do the next day.
Yeah.
And then the whole team knows exactly who is busy with what story, what is results, and
Yeah.
what are the difficulties he receives. And he can support for that every day, 9 o'clock.
Yeah, okay. Which is a typical ceremony, right? So all of your team get together and embark on a contract, and that contract is that I'm going to pick up this particular piece. This is my learnings. This is what's stopping me doing what I'm doing. So yeah, I mean, typically we advocate that, and I guess everybody runs one of those kind of sessions on a daily basis. But it's, again, it's part of that, and a typical part of the Agile process. But we'd advocate the same. Any other questions? No, I don't think it's on, by the way.
I have a question about if you have any experience, if the product owner, for example, is also the tester or the Scrum Master, also the business engineer.
Yeah, I think it's really difficult because the product ownership role is an absolute full-time job. I mean, if it's been done properly, there's probably not enough time in the day to do anything other than just manage project requirements. What tends to happen when you distract a product owner from doing the core job, things like prioritization of the backlog, the user stories, just don't happen, and they're too busy doing other things. So my experience, particularly where you've got, so I think product owner is one area where I would just dedicate to that role. I don't see success when they're sharing multiple roles, but I see less success with Scrum Masters and business engineers doing the same thing. Yeah? I think my experience is that role should be separate as well. Sharing that responsibility is very, very difficult. So I would advocate having a dedicated Scrum Master, dedicated product owner, and business engineers doing what they do.
Well, about the dedicated Scrum Master, you say that a Scrum Master is also a full-time job, but isn't it that if the team is working and they're doing a good job, the Scrum Master is not necessary, and he doesn't need to do anything if the team works well together.
Any Scrum Masters in the room want to comment? Yeah. You think?
I mean, I currently work as a Scrum Master as well as a business engineer as well, which is, I think, it's not that big projects, which is like 4 or 5 sprints. So, working as a Scrum Master and a business engineer is working quite well with me. But if once the project is like, we are on a bigger project, then yeah, even I would recommend, because separating out this role, because I know there is like lots of pressure on a business engineer already to deliver the requirements.
Yeah.
And right now I'm facing some difficulties around managing both those roles.
Yeah.
So I would really recommend as well to separate those roles
I think
out.
that's a good.
But it's not a full-time job. To be honest, for a Scrum Master, as he said, it's not always he'll be involved. I mean, he will be involved in the project, but I think if you are having a Scrum Master and you're having like 4 or 5 different projects, so he should be involved in like all 4 or 5 different projects working on a Scrum Master. But it depends on the budget of the projects.
No, it depends on the project
well.
complexity. But I mean, if
Yeah.
you look at projects that are highly complex, you look at integration, you look at dependency management, you look at making sure the product owners are doing what they're doing. A Scrum Master is a dedicated role in an Agile team for a reason, because there's often issues, blockages that need to be managed. So I agree. I mean, we do operate a mixture of business engineer and Scrum Master roles. So it depends on the complexity of the project. My own view is that if Scrum Master is a good Scrum Master, there's plenty of things that they can be doing. Keeping people happy, making sure that things that down the line are being been picked up. I tend to find what Scrum Masters don't do is tend to look forward. They tend to be reactive about what things aren't happening, what's gone wrong, taking feedback from developers saying, well, this didn't go quite right, can we learn from that? But if you're really forward thinking as a Scrum Master, you're actually anticipating what's going to go wrong 3 or 4 sprints down the line. You're looking at the backlog and saying, well, we're going to need dependency. Are we going to have problems with that? So being a proactive Scrum Master, doing that job and investing your time in it, I personally believe that it's there for a reason, and it's there as a dedicated role for a reason. But we do often have business engineers that double up as both. But something will give. Right? Because they can't do both. So if you are up against it, pressure-wise, building user stories, implementing functionality, and there's a really critical problem that's got a blockage that nobody can do, and you're on the hook for both, where's your priority? Is it in delivering what you're delivering, or is it in alleviating the problem? So you will always have this contentious position where you've got to make a decision, and that decision will be detrimental to the project, because whichever way you go, it's going to have impact. So yes, I agree, but also...
No, I mean, I agree with you as well, because having a dedicated Scrum Master on a bigger project is really important. And even I sometimes think, even like as this project, whichever I work on, even if they are small, I could do more if I'm just a Scrum Master, which I couldn't do now. So yeah, I agree, like having a Scrum Master separate is really good.
At some point, you'll be between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah.
Am I going to deliver the software I said I was going to deliver yesterday because I'm on the hook for that? Or am I going to go and sort out this really serious problem, which means nobody can deliver what they're delivering? The pressure will be on you to alleviate everybody else's problem, and you'll still be left with writing the software that you committed to writing yesterday. So, I get it, I understand it, but if I were a Scrum Master, I'd be saying I'm a full-time Scrum Master, and I'm going to be good at it, effective at it, and that's my role. But
I would say it would be like not that effective working on both, but you have to have a separate Scrum Master.
Any other questions? Oh, there's one at the
back. In a Mode 2 operation, it's easy, I guess. It's like walking on water, but do you have experience in interacting with Mode 1, Mode 2 projects?
Yeah. Some experience, I'll be honest with you. Not good. I think that the challenge with interacting with, let me talk from experience rather than hypothetical, where I've been involved in Mode 1 and Mode 2 is where Mode 1 are delivering connectivity, integration. So they're typically responsible for back office systems, they have an ERP system that perhaps they're the custodians of the, I'm not even going to say API layer, but custodians of the integration layer, because this particular organization had sort of hand-cranked APIs. And my experience of that is they have a different cadence. They have a different set of challenges, and they have a different way of working, and it's a real challenge. And when I talk about effective Scrum Masters and dependency management, that's where I think the problem comes in Mode 1 and Mode 2. That they're not working to your agenda, they're not bound by your rules, they're probably working under high levels of governance, process, procedures, that perhaps you've been unshackled from to a certain extent, because Agile lives because it can operate in a certain way. And when you bring those two organizations together, it's a fight. Because they're not going to play by your rules. You're the new guys on the block. So I have experienced that firsthand. Do I have a successful way of solving it? A good, effective Scrum Master is one of them. Who can impose. A good, effective Scrum Master and a good, effective product owner. And I think also senior support from the business. So the people, key sponsors, have got to understand that as an Agile team in a Mode 2 organization, you can't act in glorious isolation. That would be great if we could. So I think when you set up the project, when you set out and outline the governance model that governs that Mode 2 organization, that also governs to a certain extent what Mode 1 do. And I think even when you're implementing a Mode 2 organization, the organization has got to understand that the processes that govern the software development have to cover both sides, and they've got to give the Mode 1 team as many tools as they need to be able to be effective, even if they're not part of that Mode 2 organization. And I suppose that's easy to say. It's a big challenge. Cultural change is the biggest challenge, in my opinion, in implementing Mode 2. It's not about technology, it's not about what we bring to the table as Mendix, it's about whether your organization, from the very top down, embraces that Mode 2 organization and makes sure the organization can work. And another example is DevOps, right? Where does DevOps sit? It tends to sit in Mode 1, most organizations. You might do some pushing of software to staging within, but then somebody's going to take it over, typically a mode 1 person. So when we set out to build Agile teams, I would say it's a CEO decision as to whether you go DevOps and whether you implement mode 1 and mode 2, because they're going to have to change the general operating procedures of the organization to facilitate continuous development. They're going to have to say, we want to release software in weekly cycles. Unless it comes from the top down, it just won't happen. So whether it's learnings, and whether it's easy to do, I don't think it is. So my experience is that when I did the Scrum Master role in that project, we had a really, really well-connected product owner. We established at the outset what cadence we wanted to run to. We had sponsorship from the CIO, and we invited her into the process and mandated that Mode 2 would have to provide certain things. So dependency management, integration when we needed it, and they needed to operate under those rules. Not easy to solve, but that's what we do. Does that make sense? Any other questions?
Sorry, thank you. The definition of done, which you said, what we do right now is, we make sure, like, once the development is done, we mark it as, like, label it as dev done, and, we'll not mark it as done, but we'll leave up to the testers and make the tag ready for testing so that testers see that and test that, and they mark it as done. So that's, like, kind of we define the definition of done. What's, like, your perspective on that? And
yeah. Because that's sort of done after the event, isn't it, to a certain extent? Because it's done until it's done, and then it's going to be tested. So is that done? The true definition of the word done means it's finished. It's done, it's tested, it's ready to go. Barring, well, not even barring bugs, because bugs will be part of the testing. So I think it's a practical way of doing it, and I think it's probably what most people do, that they deliver the functionality, they check what they've delivered against what was required, and then they push it into a test process, and then it comes back from the test process and gets set as done, which I think is perfectly acceptable. But that's probably because you're not testing in the sprints. You're not testing daily.
We are testing in the sprint, so that's why we tag it as ready for testing and dev done, so that testers picks that story up and they mark it as done after testing it.
I thought you were doing that, which is fine. Yeah. The thing is that when it's done, it's done. Yeah, and I think that's what the important thing is. But I've often seen where stories have set to done and they're not done. They're done and ready for testing. Well, that's not done, right? So if it's ready for testing, it needs to stay there. I must admit, from your point of view, Mendix doesn't facilitate the process of that to-do and test middle scenario between running and done. So that's often why we won't see that happen. But I think that's perfectly acceptable.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah, I think we've got to wrap up now. I hope you found some of that useful. Probably, I didn't want to teach you to suck eggs. You guys probably running this daily. It's some of the things I've learned along the way, so thanks for listening.